Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're opening up a really foundational text in non-dual philosophy, the Yoga Vasistha. It's this huge dialogue, but we're going to focus in pretty sharply today. We're deep diving into Book 1, specifically chapters 11 through 15, and these chapters really chronicle this powerful, spiritual crisis experienced by the young Prince Rama.
That's right. This whole section is actually titled Vairagya. It gets translated often as just dispassion, but it's maybe a bit more complex than that. Our goal here, our mission, is to really understand how Rama, through some pretty rigorous intellectual work, just systematically tears down basically every pillar of worldly stability. Things like wealth, human life itself, and even the idea of the self, the ego. He's trying to intellectually justify why he feels this desperate need for liberation.
Yeah, and it's important to stress, this isn't just some kind of teenage angst we're talking about here. The nature of his melancholy really sets the stage. It's actually the sage Vishwamitra who gives us the key insight. He frames Rama's state not as, an emotional breakdown, but as the development of that superior intellect which rises from the right reasoning of dispassionate men.
Exactly. And that's the crucial difference between ordinary sadness and this concept of Vairagya. Rama is, yes, deeply troubled, profoundly so, but this state is actually the result of applying logic, applying reason to the world around him and finding that world, well, wanting. So by the end of this deep dive, we hope you'll understand the three main illusions or traps that Rama identifies, and maybe see the pathway towards that genuine equanimity the sages talk about, the ability to, as they put it, look upon gold and stones with an indifferent eye.
Okay, so let's unpack that initial scene then. Rama comes back to his father's court. The text describes him as, majestic, loved by everyone, humble, but internally, something's fundamentally shifted. He's described as neither sad nor merry, but seemed to be fully satisfied with himself. That satisfaction is subtle, isn't it? But it's maybe the first sign that his deep inner reflection is already starting to bear fruit.
It's almost like the quiet confidence of someone who's figured something out, even if it's unsettling. It's the tranquility, maybe, of someone who's recognized the root mechanism of suffering and is actively trying to pull away from it. And the sages there, Vaṣishtha and Vishwamitra, they immediately grasp the significance, the gravity of his state. Vishwamitra actually promises to dispel Rama's delusion instantly. He says he'll drive it away as wind drives away clouds from mountaintops. They seem to view his struggle not as a problem to be fixed, but as like the ultimate intellectual exercise unfolding.
But hang on a second. If this melancholy, this vairagya, is so profound that it basically stops him from doing his princely duties, how is that not just depression? I mean, is Vishwamitra just putting a philosophical spin on it, kind of relabeling Rama's sadness?
That's a really critical question, and the text seems to emphasize a functional difference. Depression is often characterized by a lack of energy, a loss of interest, apathy. Rama's state, his vairagya, seems characterized by intense discernment. It's active. He actually tells the sages that his travels led him to use his mind, to employ his mind to discriminate the nature of things. And this discrimination caused him to actively discard sensual enjoyments. So it's an energetic intellectual rejection based on analysis, not just a passive giving up because he feels bad. He looked at the world logically and found it flawed.
Okay. So he wasn't just rejecting the world out of spite or sadness. He was rejecting it based on the evidence gathered by his own reasoning. That makes sense. And this active rejection then leads him straight into this fundamental skepticism, which comes out really strongly in chapter 12.
Right. Once he starts down that path of discriminating, of analyzing, the world's sort of cyclical futility becomes blindingly obvious to him. He asks this devastating question, what are worldly pleasures good for? And he realizes this almost terrifying cyclical truth. Men are born to die, and they die to be born again. It just paints this picture of an endless repetitive loop if there's no ultimate permanent truth or meaning to be found within that cycle.
And this skepticism about existence itself, it turns everything we normally rely on, everything we value, into a potential burden, doesn't it? Here, it makes this point that all our possessions become the grounds of our poverty, meaning the things we gather, they eventually just weigh us down, or they create fear of loss, or they're transient anyway, ultimately making us poorer in spirit, not richer.
And what's really, I think, insightful here is his observation about the illusion of connection, how we actually build up these burdens ourselves. Rama observes that all objects of sense are detached from each other. He uses this image, like they're separate iron rods, they exist independently. It's only our imagination which attaches them to our minds.
Whoa. So we're essentially enslaved not by physical things, but by our own mental constructs. The connections we feel, the importance we assign to objects, status, maybe even relationships. It's all just a mental habit we mistake for objective reality.
Precisely. That's the core of the insight. And true freedom, Rama starts to realize, comes from recognizing this deceptiveness. Once you understand that the stickiness, the attachment is fabricated by your own mind, you can stop demanding that those external temporary things provide some kind of internal permanent stability, because they just can't.
Which brings us neatly to the first massive trap he identifies. This is laid out in really vivid detail in chapter 13, the denunciation of wealth. While, society generally sees wealth as a blessing, Rama just flips it. He asserts it's the cause of our troubles and errors.
Yeah, he really goes after it. And he focuses on two core philosophical points here. First, wealth is utterly, completely unreliable. The text uses these spectacular analogies to really hammer this home. It says wealth is transitory as the rainbow, it's fickle as lightning.
Those images really make something abstract, like fortune, feel incredibly unstable, almost alive in its fickleness. He even calls it unsteady as a well-born maiden following a base-born man, which suggests that wealth has no loyalty. Its loyalty is to instability itself, not to the person who currently holds it. It's a total gamble.
A complete gamble. And this inherent unreliability is then coupled with the second point, which is maybe even more profound. It's corrupting influence. The key insight isn't just that wealth can disappear. I mean, we kind of know that. It's that wealth is actively corrosive to human character while you possess it. It burns and blackens its owner, the text says. It hardens the hearts of men, makes them unkind.
It's almost like it's toxic. The text explicitly states that wealth corrupts the learned, the brave, the gentle. It compares it to dust soils brilliant gems. So it doesn't just make you unhappy potentially if you lose it. It actually makes you worse while you have it.
Indeed. And the consequences of pursuing it are presented as dire. Riches do not lead to happiness, but redound to sorrow and destruction. There's this comparison to the aconite plant. Beautiful flower, but hiding fatal poison. It looks appealing, promises life and ease, but ultimately delivers the opposite.
That earlier statement, all our possessions become the grounds of our poverty. That's just so radical when you think about it.
Yeah.
Is Rama actually demanding full renunciation here?
Yeah.
Does he think we all need to run off to the forest? Or is he saying that it's the attachment to the possession that creates the poverty, whether you physically own it or just crave it?
The emphasis throughout really seems to be on the attachment, the mental state. That's why the rich are described as isolated, inaccessible as the dark cave of a huge serpent.
Huh.
The physical wealth or the pursuit of it creates this barrier. It separates people from genuine connection, from ease. The text wraps it up by saying riches overcast the good qualities of men and like moonlight bring to bloom the buds of their misery. It's like a beautiful curse.
Wow. Okay. That sets an incredibly low bar for worldly success then. So if pursuing riches is a trap because the objects are unreliable and corrupting, then the next logical step, which Rama takes in chapter 14, is to question the reliability of the very thing that holds all our pursuits, human life itself.
Exactly. If the things we spend our lives chasing are ultimately futile or harmful, then the time we spend chasing them must also be futile unless it's directed towards some higher, more permanent purpose. Rama basically deems human life so worthless if it doesn't include that search for the permanent joy of liberation.
And again, he uses these incredibly powerful, specific images to convey just how brief and fragile our existence is. He doesn't just say life is short. He says life is as frail as a drop of water trembling on the tip of a leaflet. You can just picture it.
It's such a delicate image, and it's followed by others equally immediate, equally unsettling. Life is fast as the fleeting clouds in autumn and short as the light of lamp without oil. It really forces you to ask, why cling so desperately to something so inherently brief and unstable? He says it's futile to rely on life, as futile as trying to wreathe waves into a garland. You just can't grasp stability where it fundamentally doesn't exist.
And a life that's just filled with ignorance, just caught up in worldly affairs without this deeper perspective. That kind of life is described as a cause for their torment.
And then he gives us this horrifying, unforgettable image of existence lived in that ignorance, where death is constantly staring and growling at our face as a cat looks and purrs at a mouse in order to devour it. Chilling. It is. It's a terrifying and potentially paralyzing worldview, isn't it? So if Rama has just logically concluded that wealth is essentially poison and life is this flickering flame perpetually stalked by death, how does he pivot? How does he move from what sounds like utter despair towards a practical path for freedom without just collapsing?
Right.
Where does he pinpoint the engine driving all this sorrow?
Well, that takes us directly to chapter 15 and what he identifies as the root cause behind all these other issues. The denunciation of ego or egoism, this self-conceit, this persistent sense of I-ness, me, mine. That's what demands permanence from the impermanent. That's what drives all the attachments. Rama identifies the ego as the everlasting arch enemy. He calls it the snare of affections, and even describes it as a literal disease.
Ah, okay. So if wealth is the poison and life is the flimsy, trembling container, then the ego is like the manufacturing plant constantly churning out the craving for both. It becomes the ultimate source of suffering because, as the text says, it overcasts the equanimity of mind. It allows desires to just keep expanding like crunchy plant buds in rain. And it's this ego, this I, that drives us towards anxieties and what he calls wicked exertions, precisely because it refuses to accept the fundamental transience of wealth and life that he's just demonstrated.
So the path to freedom, therefore, isn't really about acquiring some new kind of better wealth or trying to live longer. It's about the dissolution, the dismantling of this very ego. And Rama actually shares his personal relief, saying, I am free from anxiety. Ever since I've come to know the impermanence of all enjoyments, gave up my sense of egoism, and attained tranquility of my mind. It's a direct result of seeing through the illusion.
And what's fascinating here are the mechanics of liberation described. It's not presented as some, dramatic battle against the ego, wrestling it into submission. It's described more like a vanishing act. Liberation comes when the ego simply dissolves, like a lamp's light vanishing when the oil runs out. The ego isn't a thing to be killed, but rather an impression, a persistent mental habit that needs to be seen through and effaced from the mind. And that happens through this continuous discrimination, this Vairagya he's been practicing.
The systemic conclusion running through all these chapters feels pretty absolute, doesn't it? Rama seemed to show us that our anxiety or suffering, it arises directly from demanding permanence, whether that's permanence of ownership, permanence of life, or permanence of the self, demanding it from things that are, by their very nature, transient. The powerful takeaway seemed to be, stop trying to build a permanent house on shifting sand.
That's a good way to put it. So just to recap this really profound deep dive into Rama's Vairagya, he's systematically taken apart three core illusions. First, there's wealth, that transient, character-corrupting serpent, as he calls it. Second, the illusion of a stable human life, that frail drop of water trembling on a leaflet. And finally, uncovering the root illusion, the ego, the core disease that creates the demand for the other two in the first place.
Right. So what here, the takeaway for you listening, might be found in that practical framework the sages hint at: self-reflection, detachment, and seeking wisdom. It seemed to require that critical thinking, that initial philosophical effort Rama undertook to even recognize how we might be, as the text says, enslaved to the world or spellbound with riches. It's developing that wisdom, that seeing through, which potentially liberates us from that painful cycle.
And the goal of that liberation, well, true living, according to the Yoga Vasistha, is defined very clearly. It's a state of transcendental tranquility, free from sorrow and remorse. That's the state beyond that terrifying image of the cat and the mouse.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought, drawn straight from the text we've been exploring. If human life, when it's filled primarily with ignorance and attachment, is considered a cause for torment, then how might you, in your own life, begin to restructure your daily thoughts and actions to move even slightly closer to that state of true living? That state described as permanently free from the cycle of regret and anxiety.
That perhaps is the only pursuit truly worth the effort in the end.
Indeed. Until the next deep dive, keep reflecting.